Nan Chan by Tang Jiu Qing, Volume 2. Chapter 21. Tangji's illness went as quickly as it had come. Jinglin was adamant on traveling south to protect the front, so 2 days later, they bid Yining farewell. Yining drank tea in silence while Jinglin spoke. The sage used to head the sect's activities in the east, but was later deployed to the west to relieve the critical situation. Although he was not an adopted son of Lord Jotian, he held a status equal to them and reported directly to the leader, such that everyone below Lord Jotian treated him with caution. "Very well," Yining said. "If you are bent on moving southward, you must listen closely. 13 cities remain on the southern front. Among them is Xuanyang, where the great spirit Shuran is sealed. You must kill it before the sea of blood engulfs the city, lest the seal break, and it bring disaster to the realm." Jinglin said, 4 of those cities form a defensive line south of Xuanyang. The walls as well as our fellows should keep Shuran out of reach for several more years. Yining shook his head. "That may be true, but the problem remains. The sea encroaches from all directions. If we do not find a way to repel it, the Middle Realm will fall sooner or later." "Is the situation so dire in the east? Why else would the Lord deploy the Phoenix so urgently? Famine drains us from within, while the sea batters us from without. We must pick our battles if we want victory." The two lapsed into silence. They had never got along, mostly due to Yining's disdain towards Jinglin's lofty ideals and solitary behavior. Nevertheless, the looming threat was so great that Yining could hardly sleep at night, much less sustain his dislike. It was after much consideration that he bared his thoughts. "The Lord's mind has always been hard to fathom, and it's becoming even more difficult. All my suggestions regarding the southern defense have been rejected. Out of the various types of disciples in the sect, the most loyal and brave have been deployed. More than half have perished. I saw their remains as I returned from the most occidental reaches of the realm. They died defending the settlements and their residents to the very last man." Yining rose and paced back and forth like a caged lion. "But what is it all for? Does he wish to sacrifice the pawns to stall for time and drive the main force into a final battle with our backs against the wall?" Jinglin noticed the morning frost clinging to the windowsill. Only then did he feel a chill in the air. "Entering the sea means certain death. We would be throwing straws against the wind." Yining followed his gaze out the window. Withered lotus flowers lay defeated in the pond, instilling in him a harrowing sense of melancholy. He shut the windows, deciding against making any extreme statements. "Fare thee well in the journey ahead." "Many thanks." Out in the yard, Tangji sat crouched on a wood stump, taking out his frustrations on an anthill. He had been ill. The morning dew clung to his clothes uncomfortably. It had been days since he last swam in his true form. He jabbed at the anthill with the stick, while a thread hung from his little finger tethered to a stone figure, which was squatting opposite him, also tormenting the ants. They poked and prodded until it collapsed, sending the ants scattering. The stone figure's grass crown was damp with dew, and there was nowhere for it to wipe its muddied hands, so it looked up blankly at Tangji for instruction. Tangji wiggled his little finger, and the stone figure hopped over the anthill and climbed onto the wood stump. He felt around his chest pocket. He was loath to use Jinglin's handkerchief, so he pulled out another one on the bottom and wiped the stone figure clean. He didn't know whose gift it was, but the wrinkled silk was embroidered with a pair of butterflies fluttering among flowers. He noticed the stone figure kept adjusting its crown, so he folded the handkerchief and tied it around its little head to secure the crown. Once finished with his handiwork, Tangji burst out laughing. He'd turned the stone figure into a miniature mugger. The stone figure shook its head and was rather content when the crown stayed in place. Jinglin walked up to them with 2 horses, so Tangji hopped off. "Shall we set off?" Jinglin handed him a set of reins. "If we hurry, we may reach Qingpu by dusk." He shot a glance at the stone figure. "Troublesome are spirits. Why don't you cast it away?" "No matter. It's but a wee child." Tangji mounted the horse and tucked the stone figure into his pocket, exposing only its head. "I'll keep an eye on it so that it behaves." Jinglin looked the stone figure in the eyes, brows furrowed in irritation, before mounting the horse. "What did you do to him?" Tangji smiled and blew a puff of air on the stone figure. "Now, hold on tight. We're going for a ride." Qingpu and Xuanyang were not far apart, but the 3 mountains in between the cities forced travelers to go around. They rode along the bridle path until a storm hit the area and caused a mudslide, delaying them by a day. The downpour continued the next day, forcing them to cut through the mountains to reach Xuanyang. They pressed on, braving the rain as they climbed the wet, winding path, but alas, the horses could not fly over the obstacle. Eventually, they decided to dismount and seek shelter in a cave. Unlike Jinglin, who could dry his clothes with a spell, Tangji had to gather some kindling and start a fire. With his back to Jinglin, he stripped and hung the clothes up to dry. He proceeded to tend to the fire and heat their rations over it. The swordsman had never seen him naked, and the sight of the musculature was as captivating as it was surprising. The merchant never flaunted his body despite being much fitter than Jinglin. "The one they called Dongjun," Tangji said, "who uses a folding fan. What is his path?" "Once he walked the path of the Asura." Jinglin felt warmth return to his fingers. "He's a demon, a bane, to be precise, born of the sea of blood. His red eyes could possess souls, and his bloodlust drove him to kill and devour. One day, Buddha sat him down by the lotus pond in Nanchan temple, and extolled the scriptures for 49 days until Dongjun finally repented and gave up his evil ways. His enlightenment begat him a heart of compassion. He is now the bringer of spring." "So I see," Tangji said with a ghost of a smile. "What of Li Rong?" "The path of the Asura." Jinglin turned his hand. "Li Rong is kind and calm by nature, the perfect candidate to walk the path of the Asura, for he can stay true to his nature, even as he battles the desires for violence and victory." "I know yours, the path of the sword, vanquisher of evil." Jinglin lowered his eyes. Shadows danced across his hands. "My true form is a sword, born to battle evil." As rain beat down on the earth, Tangji observed Jinglin's expression. It was mild, void of positivity and negativity. He broke apart a piece of hot pastry and handed one half to Jinglin. "You may not know of the happenings of the world, for you dedicate yourself to your mission. You, out of countless cultivators, shine the brightest. Even poor stragglers like myself hear of all your deeds across the realm. Hearsay paints a picture that is not the true me." Tangji made quick work of the meat-filled pastry. "Indeed, some rumors don't match what I see, but some do. Hear my thoughts, Jinglin. I have told you about me, and now I shall talk about the Jinglin I've heard about. Should it be inaccurate, you will correct it, that I might know the real you." Still chewing, Jinglin nodded. Tangji wiped his hands and propped them on his knees. "They say that you became Lord Jiotian's disciple at the age of 13. The first time you knelt and bowed before him, all the pines swayed in reverence. In that moment, your true form manifested itself. Now, I'm curious, where had you been prior to 13? A lesser spirit living in the wild?" "No." Jinglin spread out his palm. "I don't remember my origins. I'd always wandered the middle realm, parentless. When I was 8, I fought with a mutt over food and strayed into Nanchan temple, where I fell into the lotus pond and was saved by the abbot. At 13, Buddha showed me the light and pointed me north. I trekked north and eventually reached the Sect of Immortality, where I met my father. Upon closer observation of Jinglin's hand, Tang Ji saw faint lines in a lotus pattern, which he would have never noticed otherwise. He then held the hand in his own, the corners of his lips perking up. "To think you were once a little monk, and after you were adopted by Lord Jotian, I heard that his sons formed factions that engaged in unbecoming conflicts, but what I've witnessed, you're far too simple for that kind of nonsense." This candid interaction made Jinglin feel too embarrassed to retract his hand, although the touch was scalding him. The character of each man is different. Some conflict is only to be expected. "I wish for honesty in exchange for honesty," Tang Ji said solemnly, gripping his hand. "Yet you speak to fob me off. I wouldn't dare. Have they ever mistreated you?" Jinglin's gaze lowered. "That depends on what mistreat entails. Father taught me moral principles, how to tell right from wrong, and that trouble is not forcibly mistreatment, so long as it poses no danger to life." Tang Ji snickered. "Lord Jiotian merits praise for raising you, but his choice in sons oscillates between good and bad, just like himself. The moment I joined the sect, I became a sword of the world," Jinglin said. "Only through suffering does a sword become tempered. At times, my father's opinions may have been at odds with mine, but he treats me with great kindness." "What luck!" Tang Ji put on a wry smile. "Had I known, I would have taken little monk Jinglin home as my brother, and not gone so many years without my kindred spirit." Jinglin's little finger flinched again, not because he had fibbed. He didn't know why either. Tang Ji felt the tickle against his palm and tightened his grip. He felt sweat threatening to break out on his back, and was forced to face the truth. Jinglin would be the end of him. He'd lost count of the times his stomach had fluttered and his heart had melted. Oh, how he wished he could wrap himself snugly around Jinglin and listen to anything he wished to say. Finally, Tang Ji let go and put their palms side by side. The lotus pattern on Jinglin's palm began to move, its petals quivering and dripping dew. Then ripples appeared on Tang Ji's palm. A gold-red carp leapt out with a splash, before disappearing back into the water. The next moment, the animation ceased, but the carp appeared imprinted on Tang Ji's palm. Jinglin held up Tang Ji's hand, a smile blooming about his lips. "This is wondrous. You've learnt from my demonstration of the art of infusion." The smile melted Jinglin's cool demeanor and fanned the embers of Tang Ji's desires into a blazing storm. "I shall hence be the fish to your lotus," Tang Ji swore, all the while fighting the urge to seal this pledge with a kiss on the hand that so effortlessly toyed with his heart. After a long silence, Jinglin probed. "Tanguga? At last, I've known true brotherhood." Jinglin's eyes were full of delight and wonder. "I have got many brothers, but none with whom I've shared so much." "As have I. Never have I felt so intimate with another." The sight of Jinglin's fair, slender fingers touching his hands sent Tang Ji down a spiral. He wanted nothing more than to spend the rest of his days caressing those beautiful digits of this young soul. A young one, indeed. It occurred to Tang Ji just how much younger and smaller Jinglin was. He was overcome with the desire to hold the adorable thing in his arms, to wind himself around him like a cocoon, so that Jinglin might forever stay innocent. Jinglin reined in his expression when he noted the abnormally high temperature of the man's hand. "Not much time has passed since your recovery. It wouldn't do for you to catch a cold in this dreary autumn rain." When Tang Ji turned around to get dressed, Jinglin noticed the scars on those broad and strong shoulders. He thought they resembled scratches made by nails, not cuts by a blade. He leant in for a closer look under the flickering flames, and confirmed his guess. Some scratches were deeper than others, extending from his back to his shoulders. "Did you come to blows with anyone recently?" Tang Ji pulled his shirt on and secured it with the sash, then looked back at Jinglin. A laugh escaped from his lips. Not recently. I simply never had it treated. Jinglin looked away. He knew he shouldn't probe further. Curious? Tang Ji asked. Jinglin tugged at his sleeves. His head lowered ever so slightly. Tang Ji quickly finished dressing himself and beckoned him over, saying in his ear, "The person who... no matter. I'll tell you when you're older." Jinglin stared in puzzlement, but Tang Ji lay down with his arms behind his head, closing his eyes. Soon, Jinglin was sure the herb merchant was sound asleep. His doublet crawled out from Tang Ji's bosom and sat cross-legged on his chest. With one hand propping up its head, it gazed at him dejectedly with its black, beady eyes. Eventually, Jinglin entered a meditative state, listening to the drumming of the rain. The fire had gone out. Tang Ji's breathing was the only audible sound. Jinglin gradually sank deeper and deeper. Weeping Spring whirled around in his internal realm. Further down, the vastness of his spiritual expanse was silent. He had been on the cusp of the pinnacle stage for some time. Just one more step, and he would be able to abstain from food and control the wind and rain. But this door just would not open, preventing his progress. Out of nowhere, he heard the roar of a dragon. He then detected an unfamiliar aura in the depths of his spiritual expanse, which had eluded even himself. It gave off an unmistakably commanding presence as it roved around and closely circled his lower abdomen. Investigating further, Jinglin discovered that his own spiritual expanse had been damaged, but the foreign aura had stabilized and nursed it back to health, all without his knowledge. Jinglin immediately opened his eyes and placed his palm on his abdomen. His spiritual expanse was calm and undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. The more he thought about it, the more unnerved he became. When had he ever received this kind of aid? He recalled no such thing. The aura must have dispersed and converged countless times and merged as a part of him. It not only carried immense power, but also burnt so hot that Weeping Spring whirred in response. In that instant, Jinglin sensed transcendence upon him, yet the key to initiate it eluded him. Jinglin sat through the night. When the rain ceased and the sky cleared enough to allow some light into the cave, he finally let out a big breath and ended his meditation. Tang Ji returned, the stone figure tucked away in slumber, and gave Jinglin some persimmons that he had gathered. Without tarrying, they continued towards Xuanyang, a city nestled between mountains and the Shijiang River. The sect of immortality had built 3 walls and carved protective talismans into each, rendering the city impregnable to the terrors of the Sea of Blood. Before the fall of the Huaiyang Corridor, Xuanyang had been the heartland of the south, but when Jinglin and Tang Ji arrived, most of its citizens had relocated northwards. Its once prosperous port lay deserted, the neat rows of ships and boats abandoned ever since the river became infested with demons. Another one of the sect's projects was the Sky Tower where the great spirit Shuran was sealed. Once a dweller at the bottom of the lotus pond of Nanchan Temple, Shuran had the power to mobilize the bodies of water in the world with his voice. Later, when Dongjun entered the temple grounds, his malicious aura prompted Shuran to emerge, only for the latter to look into the red eyes of the Bane and become corrupted. He forsook Buddha's teachings and wreaked havoc by causing great floods. The first thing Dongjun did upon converting to the path of good was to kick Shuran into Xuanyang and seal him under a pagoda. Upon arrival, Jinglin raced straight to the pagoda, heaving a sigh of relief only when he saw the pagoda standing firm with its red seal intact. Tang Ji circled the tower on horseback. "I've never seen this kind of seal. Did Dongjun draw it?" "It was my father. Dongjun has no patience when it comes to brush and ink." Jinglin felt reassured that the red of the cinnabar was as vibrant as ever. The hooks securing the structure were forged by Lan Hai, so they should hold under most circumstances. "Whence does Lord Zhoutian hail?" Tang Ji touched the cinnabar. Stories of his origin abound. 'Tis difficult to tell the truth from lies. Father hails from the South Sea. Too much time has elapsed since his youth, and much has been lost. What is certain is that, after he reached the pinnacle stage, he began roaming the middle realm as a swordsman, and witnessed the suffering of the world, which prompted him to pursue the path of heaven. When the sea of blood poured down from the sky, he founded the sect of immortality, and accepted disciples from far and wide. That the sect grew to its present state has been no easy feat. Now, he may be stern, but he is much so towards himself than towards others. He practices what he preaches. Around the time Taojo was adopted, the eastern lands were hit with famine. Father ordered us to travel without rest, so that the rations were timely delivered. At home, he forbade celebrations and has since never partaken of meat. A man of rare virtue, Tang Jiu said. Pray tell, how is his health? He hasn't often been seen in public of late. He takes ill now and again, chiefly from fret and woe. Jinglin dismounted and walked with the horse. He has been painstakingly cultivating of late, and it's become impossible to know his progress. I could once sense the extent of his power, but now, not at all. Tang Ji's heart sank, but he smiled. If even a man of his cultivation can't do anything about the sea, the situation must be truly dire. Not quite so, Jinglin said. The dragon is the key to the solution. And if Lord Jiotian forbids his aid and instead calls for the dragon to be killed, what then? The friction between the dragon and the sect ever worsens, for ire has grown and grown for far too long. Jinglin kept walking down the street. Although the dragon refuses an alliance, he has done no evil. He built those canals to divert the sea, not for himself, but for the good of the populace. Father may not support the dragon's strategy, but he'd have no reason to kill. Time alone shall tell. Should that day come, Jinglin said, I shan't let the dragon die, for his fate is tied to that of the world, for he shall deliver us from the terror that is the sea of blood. Come what may, he mustn't die. Surely, Tang Jiu said solemnly, your father and your brothers will grow wary of you, perhaps turn on you, if you support him to such an extent. You may wish to help, but you must exercise caution. Bear in mind, you have yet to meet him. If you two do meet, you might come to despise him. Jinglin, good and bad people abound, but kindred spirits are few and far between. To endanger yourself for this individual is a fool's bargain. And that aside, the dragon, he is, by nature, wicked, cunning, and ever wary of men. He may well prove ungrateful of your sacrifice, so why subject yourself to this? Arriving at an inn, Tang Jiu took over Jinglin's reins and tethered the horses. Jinglin ambled along behind. I think he isn't so foul of nature. Huh. Tang Jiu washed his hands in the tub placed outside the inn, eyes downcast. Was it not you who deemed him a vile, arrogant character who runs a harem? Jinglin washed his hands, too. Hearsay is naught but hearsay. Yet you claim to dislike him. Fingers dripping with water, Tang Jiu asked the stone figure to fetch a handkerchief to dry his hands. Come to think of it, I don't fancy him either. Why not? For he's said to be quite comely. Comely? Tang Jiu touched his own face. Aye, more than I, which is too much to bear. Appearance is but an illusion. He is a dragon. You are not. Once in the form of man, he's judged as a man, and all do love fair faces. As an instance, when I look at you... Tang Jiu turned a scrutinizing gaze on Jinglin, a slight frown settling on his brow. When you look at me? When I look at you... Tang Jiu lifted Jinglin's chin and stared at him. You. Jinglin waited patiently. Tang Jiu's throat bobbed. Are a fatal sight. Am I so uncomely? Although I've had an inkling, never has any man say it to me. Jinglin rubbed his cheek with the back of his hand. Once I was hunting a spirit, and unwittingly lay bare my face. She started crying and promised she wouldn't run. At first, I assumed a ruse, but she indeed surrendered. Come to think of it, she must have been horrified. Have you not once looked in the mirror? Appearance is skin deep, Jinglin said. My reflection is not me. Well, who do you find comely? Dongjun? Dongjun, in his human form, is very comely. You are, too. With that, he freed himself from Tangji and entered the inn. Tangji touched his current face, which was average at best, nowhere close to his original face. Then it occurred to him that Jinglin had likely been consoling him, since the swordsman didn't even find himself attractive, so what would he know of beauty? Tangji stood dumbly at the entrance, unsettled by the short remark for much longer than expected. He even peered into the tub to see his reflection, before pushing past the curtain and following Jinglin upstairs. Only 50 men were stationed in Xuanyang, but all were masters who possessed spiritual expanses. They gathered outside Jinglin's quarters to greet him when he stepped out. As soon as they caught sight of a white robe late into the night, they lit up with joy and reassurance. They had heard much of Lord Linsong and had long been fascinated with Weeping Spring. Rarely did one ever meet Jinglin, so they gave him a warm welcome and fell over themselves to be his guide when he expressed his desire to tour the city and reinforce the protective talismans on the walls. One of the senior men saluted Jinglin and fell into place nearby. My lord, have you come bearing a message? Pray, call me by name. I have yet to be conferred a title, so it isn't appropriate. Father is the only one deserving of that address. Jinglin glanced at the neighboring room to find it dark. The man must have fallen asleep. And no, I bear no message. I've come to gain insight for myself. Let us walk. The men were too timid to use his name. Sir, we'd never show such disrespect. This way, please. Grass and trees rustled in the chilly autumn wind, paving the ground with wilted leaves that crinkled underfoot. Many dwellings they passed by were abandoned, their doors creaking loudly in the wind. How many have left Xuanyang? Jinglin asked. More than half, the senior disciple replied. The citizens began panicking after receiving news of the fall of the Huaiyang corridor. Some families left on the very day. A good number of them dumped their daughters in the country, some of which have made their way back. Sadly, Yangli Hall is now fully occupied, and our food supply is diminishing rapidly, but we have hope. A message arrived yesterday, informing us that these unwanted children are to be escorted out of Xuanyang in a few days, to be raised and educated in the Lord's Academy. Li Rong had never mentioned the academy to Jinglin, but this was not the right place and time for discussion, so he merely gave a nod. The walls of Xuanyang were fortified, its integrity tangible when Jinglin pressed a hand on it. Talismans gradually emerged, glowing traces in the night. Then a web of threads promptly materialized over the city, converging from all sides to seal the sky tower. On a night as tranquil as this, if a man with keen ears were to perk them up, he would hear Shuran's slow, deep breathing coming from the base of the pagoda. As Jinglin walked along the base of the wall, a luminous glow floated around him, creating a trail of blue light. He performed a hand sign, and the trail sank into the soil. A loud rumble followed as the walls rose by several inches. Jinglin stepped back and looked up. Has the city no watchman atop the wall tonight? By all means, sir. Under such a dire state, we may not take rest. The disciple followed his gaze and frowned. Why do they keep silent? Jinglin leapt onto the wall to see the soldier on duty with their backs to him. He began approaching them, but a drastic shift in the air prompted him to draw his sword before the men made a move. The cold blade swept through the air, and a head tumbled onto the ground. Yet, not a drop of blood shed from the severed neck. Instead, a tiny face climbed out and stretched its arms, which were wisps of smoke. A blight. Jinglin tapped his foot, and the weapons resting against the wall flew into the air. A blast of air sent the blades forth, decapitating the other guards. While the blights emitted sounds of mastication, The headless guards lunged at Jinglin. After Weeping Spring circled him, creating a ring of light, he plucked it out of the air. His black hair billowed as the black miasma around him screamed and dispersed, leaving no other sounds except for the whistling of the wind in the night. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the base of the tower. Sword in hand, Jinglin flew into the air and saw the tower shaking violently, and the nearby buildings collapsing. "Oh no!" the disciples below the wall cried in alarm. "Shuran wishes to break through the seal." His voice didn't carry far, as the wind tore it asunder. The tower tilted over with a loud rumble, ripping through the talismans that had kept it in place. A terrifying claw reached out. Jinglin landed on the roof of the pagoda and slapped down a large talisman glowing blue. Shuran retracted his claw in pain. Howling in rage, he writhed and rammed the spikes on his back against the building. The moon slipped behind the clouds. A blood-red haze shrouded the sky. The pounding of the sea grew clearer, reverberating in Jinglin's ears. As the tower collapsed, he leapt down, sending up a splash of red miasma. Sensing the danger, Shuran pushed his head out, roaring angrily, and pounced. Jinglin easily dodged and landed a kick so hard that Shuran went tumbling. The wind howled in Jinglin's ears. A stab of pain shot up his back. The next thing he knew, his chest churned, and his spiritual expanse roiled. Heat rushed through his veins, and his senses faded away. The elusive door he had been seeking had opened, albeit at an unfortunate time. He was frozen in place while Shuran lunged, his massive maw snapping down. The miasma broke apart, a powerful hand reaching out and ramming into Shuran's mouth, locking his jaws. Shuran flew into the air and slammed into a wall, which cracked under impact. Before he could roll away, a punch landed on his abdomen, knocking him into his human form. As he choked on his own spit, blind and dazed, someone grabbed him by the hair and cracked his head on the ground. As he bled into the cracked earth, he trembled in sheer terror. My lord," he stammered, "pray have mercy." No answer came. He was lifted by the head and slammed again. Shuran could not do a thing. This was the Dragon Emperor, who had a deadly grip around his neck. Shuran's face was slick with his own blood, and he could only barely open one eye. The sight of Tang Jiu's stony face sent tremors through his body. "Have mercy! Have mercy!" Tang Jiu tilted his head slightly. "Keep your distance." Shuran braced for more pain, only to realize that Tang Jiu was not talking to him, but to the men who were fast approaching. The sect members did not recognize Tang Jiu, but that he had taken down Shuran with one blow convinced them that he was a high-ranking individual of the sect, and they halted as commanded. Jinglin was still totally unaware of the violence around him. His 5 senses had been sealed, and a storm raged in his spiritual expanse, surging towards the metaphorical door in his chest. A sharp pain exploded. Among the tidal surge of energy, his true form gradually sank. The cold blade spun, then dissipated. Another burst of energy swelled up, and the blade shone again, slowly coming into being. Every inch creaked and groaned as though it were being forged again. The pinnacle stage was upon him, and he must not be disturbed during the critical process. Weeping Spring had nailed itself into the ground beside Jinglin, marking out a circular barrier around him. As the sect members tiptoed back, one asked, "Sir, the sea of blood is nigh. Shall we escort the civilians to safety?" Tang Jiu looked up. The moon was barely visible behind dark clouds. Only red miasma loomed, accompanied by the nightmarish roar of the waves. "No need. Simply see that they bolt their doors and windows. Aye, we will have them remain within their walls." Once the white-robed men retreated, Shuran called Tang Jiu again. He could recall how he, huddled in the silt of the lotus pond, would be overcome with terror whenever the dragon came near. Shuran had control of the great waters, devouring them if he so wished, but he knew Tang Ji could devour him whole. "I was ignorant of your presence, my lord." Shuran propped himself up while gulping down his bloody spit. "I would never knowingly offend you. 'Twas not you who was my target." "Oh," Tang Ji cooed. "Who was your target?" Shuran's eyes gravitated towards Jinglin. The taste of metal saturated his mouth. He searched desperately for words. I didn't... The next thing he knew, his forehead met the rubble on the ground again, this time with such force that he almost passed out. Then he was dragged up by the neck as Tang Ji rose. He went weak in the knees and knelt down, hugging the arm that was tough like steel. "My lord, pray have mercy," he cried, a pathetic mess of an old man past his prime. "I was forced to fight, for the threat of Weeping Spring is unimaginable. My lord, for countless years have I been oppressed, living in fear, but I wish to live yet. I shall do your every bidding, so long as you show me mercy." Tang Ji eyed the ruins of the pagoda. The miasma obscured everything over 10 steps away, shrouding the city under a blanket of clammy, foul-smelling air. "The opportunity for redemption is before you. What more do you need?" By the time a sect member returned, Shuran had left. "Sir," the sect member said nervously, his voice muffled by the hand clasped over his nose, "the Lord has entered a meditative state in preparation for transcendence. Remaining here will prove too dangerous. The sea is upon the city. Whatever shall we do?" "Amitabha." Tang Ji smiled to appear approachable, unlike the malevolent mask he had worn when he beat Shuran bloody. Long had Shuran bathed in the veritable chants in Sanskrit and heard Buddha's teachings. Though he had become corrupted, his conscience stood firm. Today, with Jinglin's help, he has returned to the path of good, and will face the incoming demons. Jinglin's talismans will sustain the walls against the waves of the sea. You need only secure the gates. Overjoyed, the sect member put his palms together and bowed several times to Jinglin. "Glory to Lord Linsong. I shall go to the gates and stand guard. But I must ask out of concern for his safety. When do you reckon he will awake from the process?" "Much will hinge on the reconstruction of his true form," Tang Ji replied. "Pray, have a private residence ready for him. Attendance won't be needed as long as a clean water supply is available." "Certainly. But what of displacing him? If Weeping Spring does not let us near?" "Keep away, and you will be safe." With that, Tang Ji strode past the cultivator and stepped into the circle. Weeping Spring let out a shrill cry. Tang Ji flicked its hilt, and it swayed a few times before going still. He picked Jinglin up, so the cultivator moved to help. To his surprise, Weeping Spring sprang back into action and stabbed itself right next to the man's foot as a warning. The man merely gawked. "Kindly show me where I must go," Tang Ji said, Jinglin secure in his arms. "I shall tend to him." This was the second time Tang Ji held Jinglin. This time, Jinglin was not as supple, of course. A storm raged inside as he struggled to transcend to the next stage. His breathing was so faint that Tang Ji wouldn't have caught it if he had worse hearing. Weeping Spring slipped back into its sheath, showing absolutely no resistance to Tang Ji, for the foreign heat in Jinglin's body originated from the dragon. By a twist of fate, they laid together, and thanks to the drug Taoja had fed to Jinglin, their energies had merged seamlessly as one. Even if Tang Ji were to get more physical, the sword would not stop him. Following the directions given, Tang Ji arrived at the allotted residence and made his way to the bedchamber. He laid Jinglin down, then settled into a seat next to the bed. Jinglin's palms were icy cold, his brow was deeply furrowed, and his forehead glistened with sweat. In fact, he was sweating so much that the bedding grew dark, as though he were a block of ice melting away. His breaths grew shallower and shallower, until they eventually seemed to stop altogether. Transcendence was a matter of life or death, and success or failure depended entirely on the cultivator. However, these trials had been more or less a formality for Jinglin because his mind was clear and still like water, and he was one with his sword. He emerged victorious every time, transcending with ease. Now, to reach the pinnacle stage, one had to cast aside all distractions and reconstruct his true form, but his urgency to patrol and survey the southern lands had compromised the mental peace that had afforded him smooth sailing. Jinglin himself was not aware of the dangers. His consciousness roamed within his spiritual expanse. The door was wide open, but he could not enter. Was it because his understanding of the path had become tainted? Or had he lost the connection with his sword? Try as he might, he could not find the key. He lingered around the door, his body throbbing with pain from the agitation of his spiritual energy. He was a bowstring, drawn back and raring to go, but unable to find release. His spiritual expanse was brimming over, yet the energy was not allowed passage to a larger expanse that belonged to the pinnacle stage. The crimson miasma of the sea still loomed over Xuanyang. The autumn temperature was low, but not quite enough to produce ice. Yet the bedding underneath Jinglin began to harden, and his hair became tipped with frost. Although his mind did not comprehend the cold, his thinking slowed, and focus evaded him. Nevertheless, he settled down, legs crossed, and continued the search for the key. Beyond the city walls, Shuran was sucking the miasma into his mouth before heaving it out elsewhere. His true form was gargantuan, enough to swallow blights in one gulp, but unlike Tang Ji, he had to spew it all out afterwards. Above the tightly shut city gates, members of the sect of immortality toiled to dispose of the existing corpses to prevent resurrections or possessions. From here, the most senior member gazed out into the sea, but because of the darkness, he could only see the silhouettes of banes and blights rising and falling deep within. Curiously, all was silent. He rubbed his sore eyes and peered out again. This time, he saw a shadow rise amidst the miasma, far greater than even Shuran. The monstrous thing trudged in rhythm with the waves, swaying as it advanced towards Xuanyang. How odd. He leant over for a clearer look. What might that be? It bears no likeness to banes nor to blights. The shadow suddenly charged, crashing down on him in a monstrous, foul-smelling wave. "Prepare the—" His command was cut off as the wave engulfed him, followed by the sickening crunch of his bones being chomped to pieces, and eventually, even that was absorbed into the sea. Shuran promptly opened his jaws, but before he could suck in a thing, the massive wave crashed down on him. He howled at the sky as blights latched onto and tore into him. Scrambling to retreat, he yanked them off and crashed into the city wall, leaving the talisman shaking. The hide on his back had been ripped open, and the blights transformed into the wind to ensnare him again. He dragged himself over the wall, bloody and battered, a mere shadow of himself. The miasma surged over him, forcing itself into his throat as it swept him along. At last, with a resounding boom, the city gates gave. Gasping for breath, Shuran shifted to his human form to avoid attacks. He howled as he clung to the wall. "Your Majesty!" Tang Ji pressed his palm on Jinglin's back, channeling a hot current of energy. As Jinglin's hair began dripping with water, he probed further, circling the spiritual expanse, careful not to intervene and cause complications. The expanse was like the coldest of winter days. Even the tiniest wisps of energy had frozen solid in their dash towards the door. The aura that Tang Ji had left behind gathered under the expanse as fortification, lest it cracked and leaked. Weeping Spring was nowhere to be seen. In its place, a manifestation of the lotus imprinted on Jinglin's palm. The flower bloomed and withered, again and again, a miniature of life and death that reduced the course of his life to mere instants. Each revival embodied a stage of enlightenment that was overtaken by another. Never-ending was his growth, and forever must he strive. First, a swaddled bundle materialized at the heart of the flower, carrying an infant with a lotus imprinted on his palm. The infant that was Jinglin grew to be a toddler, a bib hanging off his neck, and his hair in 2 spiky bunches. He waved a rattle drum and giggled at his own music. Then the toddler sprouted up into a shabbily dressed boy of about 5 years of age, who sat, a solemn mask on his face, holding a chirping grasshopper in his hands. Eventually, he set it free, and it leapt away, turning into blue light that encircled him. The next moment, he was a young monk in a brown garb, palms pressed together. The innocence of boyhood was in full display on his face, as he chanted the scriptures. All the while his eyes followed a butterfly flitting past him. The butterfly dissolved into specks of light, and the monk rose to his feet and turned around, metamorphosing into a young man in a loose white robe, his hair now secured with the silver crown. Smiles disappeared from his face, but beside him stood a little stone figure that swung its arms and marched like a human before doubling over with laughter. Jinglin merely looked at it with lowered eyes. By now, so much of himself had been hidden away. Such were the stages of Jinglin's enlightenment. Eventually, the individual in the lotus matured into the Jinglin that Tang Ji knew, and the lotus began to wither again. Tang Ji frowned. What more could there be when the manifestation had caught up to the present? He stepped closer, and immediately the lotus petals swirled up in the air. Jinglin's eyes were cast towards the horizon. For a moment, Tang Ji thought the man would wither away into nothingness like the petals. He quickly grabbed Jinglin by the arm. A heart-rending cry cut off his words and yanked him back to reality. When he opened his eyes, he was back on the chair, while Jinglin, still on the bed, showed no signs of rousing. The pungent smell of blood ignited Tang Ji's fighting instincts. He pulled the door open and saw the entire city awash in red. "My lord!" Shuran crashed into the courtyard. "I failed to hold it back. It acts in the oddest way tonight." The citizens had yet to evacuate, yet the blood had reached the stairs of this residence. Tang Ji gently closed the bedchamber door so as to seal it off from the world. "Listen, you shall guard this door." Tang Ji licked his teeth. "Inside lies my beloved, and I do not wish anyone to go near. You are to keep it closed. Closed. Do you understand?" Shuran, battered and bruised, folded under the serious gaze, falling to all fours. He hung his head in dread. I do. If it opens, I die." Tang Ji flitted away towards the commotion. Very soon, he saw what Shuran had meant by odd. He had dealt with the sea of blood countless times in his realm, but never had he seen such a creature. The crimson waves roiled and roared, its swells turning into a bloody mist that shrouded Xuanyang. A collapsed section of the wall served as a passageway for the enormous entity, which was so large that it crushed the other 3 walls. Buildings crumbled to smithereens as it wiggled and squeezed its way past. People tried to flee, but it grew 2 limbs and herded the screaming souls against a wall for an easy feast. Tang Ji leapt onto what he assumed to be the back of the being's neck, and found countless pairs of red eyes underfoot, staring unblinkingly at him. He studied them as he walked leisurely across its back. Each step he took left scorch marks, hurting the being so much that it stopped eating, and followed Tang Ji with its eyes. Giving it a good kick, he found it was extremely tough despite moving like water. Tang Ji held up a finger. "Know you how to count?" Its gaze was wooden as it finished chewing up the flesh in its mouth. It had no desire to meddle with him. It crawled forward and sent out a limb to sweep more humans into its mouth, but out of nowhere, a tail whipped down on it, breaking it instantly. Several blights trickled out of the opening as though it were bleeding. Hissing, the giant retreated as its disfigured limb melted into the sea. It glared at Tang Ji as it roared in a fury, spewing forth more miasma. "Know you how to count?" The creature opened its numerous mouths, fangs bearing at Tang Ji, and howled. Then it shifted into a wave and rushed towards a wall so as to knock him off. But even before its transformation was complete, another tail came lashing down on it. This time, it was left in pathetic whimpers, its massive body split into 2 even halves. Tang Ji took great care of his tail even when using it as a weapon. He would make sure he always moved along the grain, so no scale would be missing when the time came to ask for his beloved's hand. "I expect an answer to every question I ask." Tang Ji retrieved one of its severed limbs and turned it around as he observed it under what little light there was. "You must understand me, for you are a blight. Do you not recognize me? In the north, you would pay me court, but now you offer naught but scorn." The blights gathered and began devouring each other, then merging into a towering wave around Tang Ji. That is no way a blight should conduct itself. Just as the words left his mouth, the giant wave came crashing down, engulfing him. Teeth tore at his body, eating until not a scrap remained. The miasma settled, and the next moment, dragon claws ripped through. The dragon swung his tail and sword, tearing away half of the mystery being's body and flung it away. Then he charged into the roiling crimson sea like a wolf into a sheepfold. The miasma was opaque, but it could not block out the desperate bellow and screams of the demons. The sea swiftly retreated south, but the dragon accepted the provocation and would rise to the challenge. He sank his teeth into his target and shook his head back and forth. Both predator and prey crashed into a wall, whose protective talisman finally burst under pressure. Locked in battle, they flitted towards the deserted south. By now, the dragon had gobbled up half of the strange creature, and the other half dissolved into a nebulous cloud of blights that tried to escape. Naturally, the dragon gave chase, diving into the sea, relentlessly chomping on every evil being he came across, until he arrived at the town of Qixing. There, the mass consolidated itself, this time as a horse so as to gallop to freedom, but Tang Ji snapped it up by the scruff, and shot straight for the sky with the whip of his powerful tail. Unable to break free, the giant monster craned its neck back, transforming into a mirror image of the dragon. It bit down on the dragon, but its teeth shattered against those steely scales. The dragon gouged at the look-alike with his sharp claws, and it immediately broke down into countless demons and dispersed. The dragon opened his maw and ate until nothing of the grotesque thing remained. Then he coiled himself comfortably and sent out an oppressive aura at the sea, which ebbed back. Nonetheless, his intuition ordered him to look back. There he saw several enormous shadows rising from the miasma and closing in on him from all directions. Tang Ji froze, trying to find an escape. Jinglin sat upright in contemplation. Before him was a boundless spread of water, where lotus flowers abounded. A dewdrop clung to a petal, on the verge of falling. He sat in his spiritual expanse, frozen in time and space. In this deadly still world, he was the only existence, and it was amidst this quietness that he lost himself in his thoughts. Wherein lies the path? The path lies all about, as a cascade of mercury upon the ground, each drop round, as the image of the moon in the water, visible all around, where spring water knocks on precipitous rocks, where cicadas chirp in the evening wind, and where the sun rises above the dark horizon. All that the eyes behold and all that the ears hear, within which resides the path, and without which roams the path. The sword is a blade most sharp, yet harbors no aggression. It strives for excellence, yet oversteps not the mark. Focused is its will, yet grand is its intention. For the universe is the sword, and the sword is the universe. Jinglin snapped his eyes open, enlightened. The dewdrop hit the water, rings of ripples spreading. His spiritual expanse surged as 1,000 lotuses bloomed, turning into swirling blue beads that converged to reconstruct Weeping Spring. The sea of blood had flooded the foot of the bed, and the sword sheathed to the side began buzzing. Shuran pushed into the bedchamber, only to be blinded by a flash and hear a sword leaving its sheath. A cool wind swept through the room, and he covered his eyes with his sleeves. Silence fell upon the world. When Shuran opened his eyes again, the bloody sea underfoot had become clear water. Dawn had broken. The miasma over Xuanyang had dissipated. Were it not for the searing pain in his back, he would have thought it all a dream. A figure in white brushed past him and thanked him. He followed with his eyes as the figure flitted away on clouds. Jinglin traveled miles in moments, but he did not forget to recast protective talismans over the city before leaving. The traces of energy he had left on the man directed him south, so he threw himself into the thick miasma of the sea of blood. 100 miles he passed, and the land had all been flattened. He quickened his pace, fearing that the herb merchant had bitten the dust. Soon he arrived at Qixing, a town long abandoned even by demons. Debris and ruins lay in the miasma, while flying sand obscured the air. He may have reached the pinnacle stage, but being in the sea caused him much discomfort. The stench, in particular, was suffocating. Jinglin traversed the deserted town and made his way to the outskirts. Vast swaths of land had been raised flat as far as the eye could see. Traces of that energy lingered in the air. The herb merchant must have been here. Jinglin stopped atop a patch of earth and dug apart the loose, yellowish sediment, eventually revealing the man's face. Evidently, the man was alive, but he looked so sickly that Jinglin found himself placing a finger under his nose to make sure he was still breathing. Tangji groaned and coughed while Jinglin dug him out. Like a man on his last breath, he held on to Jinglin's arm and rasped, "Jinglin, Jinglin pressed a palm on his back and channeled pure energy into him, but the man still looked ghastly. He checked for wounds, but did not find any. The poor man must have yet to recover from the recent events. Quiet now. Jinglin helped him up. Let me take you out. Jinglin was still bloated from the feast, but this wasn't something he could voice, so he was happy to comply. They set off, only to circle back to the same spot moments later. No doubt, the demons wrought this mischief. Our escape shall prove no easy task when the sea is yet an unfathomable foe. Tangji took Jinglin's hand into his own. Alas, I fear I can endure no more, but the sea may well have no end. Pardon me, for I've brought you into this desperate strait. Speak no more such cruel words, Jinglin said. Had I not thought too highly of my strengths, Xuanyang should not now suffer so. Neither should you. Tangji sighed. Alas, sad is that I should meet my end unwed, and so young yet. Tanguga, 'tis merely the effect of the sea. I will cleanse the corruption, and you will be sprightly once more. Tangji gripped him. Even now, you weave lies to console me. No, you must know, my heart is no longer my own. Tangji put on a mask of regret. But I've erred, and that may well earn me a rejection. As much as Jinglin wished to say, you shan't die, he swallowed the words. Best if you laid bare, hiding not. What if the offense is so great that I get a knife in the heart? You reap what you sow, Jinglin said without hesitation. Surely, 'twas a grave wrong you did. Whatever might it be? Tangji was promptly choked into silence. He gripped Jinglin's hand again. I feel that knife in my heart now. I'll tell you another day. With a flick of his arms, Jinglin cleared a tiny space around them. Only then did Tangji's nose stop protesting. His abdomen still throbbed with pain, so he settled down cross-legged. If Jinglin were not present, he would have begun to digest all those demons in his spiritual expanse. The sea's ubiquitous presence from Xuanyang to here has worried me, Jinglin said. Whatever happened last night? Tang Ji knew Jinglin wished to know how he had escaped unscathed. Given Cao Tong's level of cultivation, he should have been obliterated as soon as he stepped into the sea of blood. It would not be easy to lie his way through this, but Tang Ji was prepared. I'm alive, thanks to you. Tang Ji took out Jinglin's handkerchief from his pocket and revealed the prayer bead folded within. Last night, the demons invaded, and Shu Ran somehow recovered his conscience and faced them bravely, which spared the common folks a calamity. When I saw you immobile, I assumed you were in the midst of transcendence, so I stood guard. Sadly, Shu Ran was no match for the sea, and it breached the city gates. At that moment, Weeping Spring understood the danger and left its sheath. Then I carried you to a discreet location. Jinglin touched his sheath. It was silent. He was still doubtful, but ultimately he did not say a word. While Jinglin's expression betrayed nothing, Tang Ji sensed that his story sounded too far-fetched. To make matters worse, he was not feeling well, having eaten every last demon in this region. Unable to meditate, he could only clench his jaws and bear the pain. He put a hand over his abdomen and continued. Then the demons caught hold of me. Thanks to the power of this prayer bead, I did not perish even though I was trapped. Nonetheless, I shall no longer deceive you. Jinglin. He suddenly choked on bits of blood. Jinglin pressed his hand on Tang Ji's abdomen. Tangguga, are you troubled with indigestion? With Jinglin's face in such close proximity, Tang Ji promptly forgot his words. All he could feel was the palm caressing his abdomen in such a way that he could barely think straight. Li Rong said it is easily cured by stroking it, like this. Chapter 22. Through years of training and battles, Jinglin's long, slender fingers were toned and powerful. Now, those strong digits were making gentle strokes on his abdomen, igniting a flame deep within Tang Ji. Any discomfort due to overconsumption vanished instantly, and he forgot all about his act of illness. Every little touch kneaded the dough that was his heart, developing its integrity and form. Jinglin felt the muscles under his hand tensing. Fret not. I'll expel from you the toxic aura of the sea. Tang Ji moved Jinglin's hand up to his chest. I overate, then fled in a hurry, so now I suffer from indigestion. It does cause discomfort, but... Tang Ji gulped. Perhaps best that you stop stroking me. Jinglin understood his mistake, so he retracted his hand. Pardon me, for I have little gift for this. No matter, Tang Ji said, which belied his true feelings. The touching had led his mind to salacious places, which he knew was inappropriate, but when Jinglin disengaged, what he felt was disappointment, not relief. He took Jinglin's hand and pressed it to his chest. We're friends, brothers. Why be so severe? We must act as one if we are to survive these dangerous lands, healthy and intact. In that case, let me carry you upon my back, that we might not lose each other. Tang Ji stretched his legs out. Surely my feet will drag in the dust, and will both fall, exhausted, before we find the exit. Pray, hold my hand and lead the way. You said I was full of youth and vitality, so I trust I shan't die. And I have this prayer bead which affords protection. I shall endure for some time yet. Jinglin nodded, ending the topic. Tang Ji finally had the chance to study the swordsman. Breaking through to the pinnacle stage was no laughing matter, yet he did not perceive any external changes. Only when he stole a look at Jinglin's spiritual expanse did he understand the advancement. His adoration for the swordsman only grew. Puzzled by Tang Ji's gaze, Jinglin asked, Has my appearance changed? No. Have I grown taller? No. Then why must you stare? Tang Ji took a deep breath. Is it a sin to behold beauty? Jinglin's arm flew up to block his face, leaving only his eyes peeking out. Tang Ji pressed his arm down for a clear view. How mean you are. The moment your beauty is praised, you hide it from my view. Mean, you say. You look at me every day, but I've never hidden from you. Jinglin gathered his thoughts. I've never teased nor duped you. Tang Ji chuckled. You wish to say I've done so to you? I'm a fatal sight, Jinglin reminded. Tang Ji reined in his laughter. I speak the truth. Such a fatal sight you are that my breath leaves me. My heart can barely endure. Feel that? Jinglin felt the strong thumps of the organ against his hand. The man was certainly far from the ill state described, but he hadn't a clue how to respond to such rhetoric. Tang Ji was tickled pink by the fact Jinglin tried to feign composure when he was clearly flustered. As the saying goes, a warrior's might is not against a maiden's fair grace. Little could I imagine falling victim to a fellow's fair grace. Trust that I mean no offense. I wish only to sing your praises. Have you no faith in me? Jinglin shook his head. He believed only half the account given about the events of the previous night, but he was certain that the herb merchant was not a bad person. If Tang Ji had wanted his life, he could have struck at many points during their travels. What Jinglin did not know was that Tang Ji had set his sights not on life, but on his heart, his soul, his being. You might regret shaking your head so soon, Tang Ji said. I'm indeed a bad person. The sea moved south instead of harming the people of Xuanyang, for which I believe you deserve credit. A man who put others before his own could not be bad. You may have hidden from me matters which are not to be shared with an acquaintance like me, but one day you will. The words that Tang Ji had just tucked away rose to the surface, fighting to escape his throat. Luckily for him, Jinglin freed his hand and slung Weeping Spring over his shoulder. No one else has fully entered the sea. I initially assumed the miasma consumed humans, and our lesser cultivators couldn't breach through without harm, but now I believe this isn't the condition. Aye, you couldn't have made this discovery without entering the sea. Jinglin, listen carefully. No demons are present, so what might that sound be? Jinglin pricked up his ears, taking in the rustling sound of the sandstorm. Gradually, he caught what seemed to be breathing amidst the wind. He frowned. The more he listened, the more distinct it became, and the more alarmed he felt. Tang Ji said, The sea may take the form of water or fog, within which demons breed infinitely. The world has considered it as a cursed sea that had poured down from the heavens, because the Empyrean Dam had been damaged, but not once has a man considered that it could be he. You and I know very well about the events in Huaishu. The sea not only prevented the summoning of reinforcements by blocking the light of beacon towers, but also employed diversion tactics to take Qixing. That a demon possesses this level of intelligence is not odd. Rather odd is that they come in organized swarms reminiscent of an army. The root of chaos lies in the sea of blood, for if the demons heed a man, then he is the scourge of humanity. Yet another conjecture is that the sea is not a sea, but a man, Tang Ji continued tirelessly. You claimed the dragon built channels to redirect and swallow the sea. Were the sea, in fact, a man, then this strategy would prove feasible. Hard it would be to swallow a sea, yet a man may be taken with ease. Jinglin frowned. Were the sea a man, what of Dongjun? He was originally a bane born of the sea, but his heart is now set on the righteous path. Since breaking away from the sea, he is no longer considered evil. Such is the true mystery. Tang Ji blew away the sand on his robe. I think he's a man whose form greatly differs from that of the common man, for in his body the demons breed merrily. If so, 'tis in his body that we stand. Jinglin's mind worked quickly. As fog, as water, he won't be easily captured or eliminated. Yet within him, evil beings continue to breed. I know not what must be done. You will find a way. Mind you, these are mere speculations. Tang Ji pinched the prayer bead with a pensive expression. There is one matter I can no longer keep from you. Lay bare only that which you wish to lay bare. Tang Jiu sighed. You understand I've many matters hidden? So I've just understood. Tang Jiu covered his abdomen, feigning pain. A trap so clever, I unwittingly fell for it. I didn't imagine you'd be so sly with your words. All that one sees and hears is a lesson. One never stops learning. My time with you has shown me the truth of these adages. Tang Jiu leant forward. I knew you were a smart one. The repeated, unwarranted praise made Jinglin uneasy. His little finger squiggled in the sand. When he lifted his head, he was a picture of calm. What is it you wish that I know? Your elixirs are not as they ought to be. Jinglin raised a brow. His hand moved towards his pocket before he recalled that he had given it to Tang Jiu. And how should they be? Tang Jiu tossed the bottle back to him. Do all the disciples in your sect consume this? I know not of others. Jinglin uncorked it and took a whiff. But my siblings do, as do I. We've been given a monthly dose since joining the sect, which has decreased after we formed a spiritual expanse. Its effect is to aid in strengthening the constitution. By its taste, Tang Jiu said, the elixir is of mighty potency. It can forcibly boost one's cultivation. One pill alone substitutes a century of focused cultivation. Know you its making? My brother Lan Hai tends to a garden that solely produces rare and precious herbs, and is the source of all elixirs. Jinglin's voice became strained. What fault does it bear? Tang Jiu felt loath to spoil Jinglin's bright and clear eyes. Upon your return, best you seek out the making of this elixir. For now, you must consume no more, for it stimulates and pushes your spiritual expanse to grow and grow, which presses dangerously on your vital organs. The long-term effect is... The vital organs. Death, Tang Jiu finished grimly. This elixir. Clenching his fists, Jinglin could barely produce a thought. He gave a dispirited look at Tang Jiu and grasped the man's sleeve. Cold sweat beaded on his back. 'Twas father who provides us the pills. Nothing has ever happened. Surely no father would harm his own children. Even if we weren't his sons, he cannot afford to lose a single man, for the sect finds itself in a precarious position. I agree, Tang Jiu said. Lord Jiutian is your father and the head of the sect. He has naught to gain if you were to fall. Therefore, I think it wise to conduct a thorough investigation. In a complex web of politics that is your sect, intrigue is an easy tool to use against one's enemy. Jinglin's expression relaxed, but his eyes were downcast. Tang Jiu pondered for a moment. I know little of your siblings, but I shall give my kindred spirit a warning. As one should not seek to harm another, he should not forget to protect himself. Your conspicuous displays of strength and power have long sown seeds of displeasure and jealousy, although those individuals might fear you far too much to sprout and grow in daylight. You should take care so that you might not fall victim to their wretched, underhand designs. Tang Jiu knew he harbored the same wretched, underhand designs. The dragon was an arrogant being who rarely admitted to his wrongdoings, thanks to a twisted sense of right and wrong that benefited only himself. Yet this arrogant being could not bring himself to disclose what he had done to Jinglin on that fateful night. Taoji was to blame for administering the drug, but Tang Jiu chose to ravish a vulnerable Jinglin because he wanted so. He wasn't honorable, nor was he righteous, but he also was not a hypocrite. He did not try to blame Taoji and absolve himself of all sins. You mustn't take the bulk of my words to be the truth, but you must remember one thing. Tang Jiu lowered his voice to a whisper. I'm a wild, depraved animal given to his impulses. I may or may not abuse another man, but I will abuse you. Uncertain how to interpret these words, Jinglin answered prudently. We are like brothers, Tang Guge. You need not speak so ill of yourself. Tang Jiu looked away in disbelief. How can you agree so readily to abuse? There is strength in numbers. Jinglin looked at Tang Jiu's abdomen. Any improvements? Not a serious problem by any means, Tang Jiu said. I was scared out of my wits, being alone in the miasma, but I've recovered them all after seeing you. A pity I can't deliver you to safety. Jinglin put the bottle into his sleeve. If we were in a stomach, how are we to find the exit? Demons excel at clouding the mind and bending the will. We've lingered for some time so that everything we see might be an illusion, and we lost direction. Tang Jiu rubbed his own stomach, the discomfort much less than before. If I start speaking nonsense, it must be because evil beings have possessed me. A quick jab should awaken me. Very well, Jinglin said, but what if I'm affected too? You shan't. Tang Jiu rose to his feet. You who practice the way of the sword have reached the pinnacle stage. Even the sea of blood would feel threatened, much less the demons born from it. You're of a steadfast mind, so that you may not easily be corrupted. Now recall the odd corpses we saw in Huaishu. That we are here means we may as well search Qixing for more signs. As they entered the town, the miasma kept away, wary of Weeping Spring. To Tang Ji's delight, the ache in his gut also gradually dissipated, an added benefit of being so close to Jinglin and his cleansing energy. The Shijiang hugged the town. Although its port was never as grand as that of Xuanyang, it had been prosperous. Now it lay buried under sand and debris. The waters had become exceedingly putrid, crowded by pieces of rotting flesh drifting along. Jinglin pushed aside a collapsed wall to reveal bodies squashed against the door, belonging most likely to those who had tried to flee the sea, only to be trampled to death. I've witnessed the sea set its might on settlements in my homeland. Tang Jiu loosened up the rotting corpses. Once blights appear, they know no end until the last chicken be consumed. Yet here they oft abandon the dead, uneaten. 'Twas not their manner to behave. Not in the north alone, but likewise in the east. Jinglin examined the remains. When the first crisis befell the eastern lands, I had been amongst the first to face the roaring tides of the sea of blood. The blights consume anything and everything. They left the children of Huaishu untouched, and they wouldn't feast on the crushed bodies in Qixing. Tang Jiu wondered aloud. Perchance they wish only to wreak havoc, not to consume? If so, Jinglin looked him in the eye. The demons no longer toil to satisfy their appetite, but to besiege settlements. They know not only to band together, but also the art of war. Were it a man, our many contradictions may be easily resolved, Tang Jiu said. We shouldn't jump to any conclusions. Let us look elsewhere. As they ventured further, they observed corpses in every nook and cranny of the ravaged streets. Most were dismembered, evidently torn apart by the blight's teeth, but curiously, few had been fed upon. Bodies did not hold form for long in the sea, and by now many had become wet, bloody mounds. Even the skeleton showed signs of erosion. I understand now, Tang Jiu blurted, standing among the skeletons. The demons assaulted the settlements, not only to lay traps, but also, I believe, to feed the sea. Behold the numerous dead bodies, merely discarded. The demons did not eat them or make off with them. Instead, they let the remains dissolve. Surely, a deliberate decision by the master of the sea. Mankind can hardly survive in the sea. Jinglin looked around. Ordinary people who touch the miasma promptly die. Says who? I saw with my own eyes. And what happens if a cultivator enters? Tang Jiu moved aside to reveal a heap of white robes. Many members of the sect of immortality had met their ends here. This one had nothing left to prove his existence aside from corroded robes and a broken sword standing in the ground. Though the tassel and tag swayed and dangled off its grip, the blade remained tall and proud. Jinglin bent over and picked up the tag, which was hollow and light, that would tell him the name and cultivation of this fellow. He dusted the tag off and got a clear look at the writing. Spiritual amassment, Tang Jiu read aloud, which means his spiritual expanse had been formed. Behold what remains of his sword, and note the lack of grime and its persistence after the death of its owner. We may fathom that his true form is strong enough to protect himself even if he stepped into the miasma. What reason has the sect of immortality to continue avoiding the inevitable? At the birth of the sea, we bade fellows to scout the situation, but none ever returned, Jinglin said. We learnt of banes and blights only when the sea began setting itself on settlements. Most fellows cannot stand against the demons, even if the miasma is not fatal, whence the prohibition against entering the sea. Nevertheless, the constant attacks on border towns and cities saw our fellows sacrificing themselves to hold back the sea, for the act of deserting is forbidden. Never had anyone survived the sea's encroachment. Methinks the sea prefers consuming cultivators. Tang Jiu pulled out the broken sword, its blade engraved with the motto Honor and Valor. He flicked away the dirt and placed it beside its owner's clothes, with a rock to hold them in place. Jinglin put away the tag. To Dong Jun I put forth the idea of venturing into the sea. He likewise agreed that the risk would be great for any man. Dong Jun, huh? I have followed his comings and goings over the years. He oft wanders the lands, but is reluctant to approach the frontiers with the sea. Is there none that doubts him who best knows the sea? Father holds him in high esteem, but he has always come under suspicion, Jinglin said. In fact, he holds a similar position as I in the sect. He addresses the heart of the matter when he speaks. Not a single brother has escaped his mockery. He hardly travels to the borders, for he is aware of the problematic nature of his origins. All the more bizarre, Tang Jiu said. He repented and learnt compassion at the lotus pond in Nanchan. Why did he join the sect instead of becoming a monk? Father asked for his allegiance thrice, but he refused. Then one day, he was visiting when he saw Qingyao chasing butterflies in the garden. He joined her in play. The innocent and artless girl asked him 2 questions. Which questions? Where's your home? And, will you be my brother? Jinglin said. As a bane, Dong Jun has neither parents nor siblings. That he succumbed to the words of a child was likely out of loneliness. Since he took his place amongst us, he's shown naught but good grace. But his sincerity is much in question, save for Qingyao, whom he holds dearly. To him, not even father matters as much. Each of your brothers is intriguing, to say the least. Tang Jiu smiled. You said you and Dong Jun are similar. In what way? Only moments later did the answer come. That we are unlikable. As a sandy wind swept through the town, lifting strands of Jinglin's hair, Jinglin looked calm. He could very well be cross, but nothing showed. His little finger would not move. His eyes were calm. Yet Tang Jiu could read it like ink on paper. He closed the distance between them, and Jinglin stepped back in a panic, almost tripping in the process. I shall find what is unlikable in you. Tang Jiu pinched Jinglin's chin and tilted it up. Those bright eyes are lovely pools. When they get watery, they're misty lakes. And when you cry... Have you cried? Jinglin was still reeling. No. It seems I've gotten the better part of the bargain. Tang Jiu cracked a smile and traced a swirl from the corner of Jinglin's eye. When you cry, those lakes overflow, and little pearls slide over the silky soft... Tang Jiu's gaze darkened as his fingertip paused on Jinglin's cheek, and hit the softest part of my heart, making it ache and wanting. Ache? Jinglin felt tongue-tied. The herb merchant's eyes were those of an eagle hunting its quarry, a wolf stalking its prey. Dangerous. Tang Jiu said nothing, as he was trapped in a whirlpool of wanton notions. His head felt heavy, so he let it fall towards Jinglin, all the while drawing him ever closer. How could there be such a pretty little thing? Relative to his dragon form, Jinglin was only the size of his hand. With a huff, he could send the man toppling. The cold mask locked over Jinglin's breathtaking beauty had a death hold on Tang Ji's heart and soul. The reflection in those eyes was not of the herb merchant Cao Tong, but of a greedy, conniving spirit. Tang Ji softened his breathing, but his grip tightened. He had a million ways to toy with Jinglin, but they all crumbled under Jinglin's gaze and became a thrilling burst of motivation to conquer. "No, 'tis not an ache," Tang Ji breathed, "but ecstasy." Their lips were so near that his breathing was audible. He knew how supple and wet Jinglin was. Even if blinded, he would know how to take control of those hips and make the man tremble. At that moment, the guileful spirit found himself in want of guile, for it was he who was ensnared in a trap set by a blissfully ignorant Jinglin. Spellbound, Tang Ji moved in for a kiss, when a palm pressed against his waist. Then a finger jabbed it. "I fear you've been entranced by demons." Jinglin's face was flushed as he ripped himself away. "Ow!" Tang Ji gasped, clutching his abdomen and hissing through clenched teeth. Indeed. Damn it. He was overcome with regret. He must have been kicked in the head to give such instructions to Jinglin. Jinglin had not held back with the jab, so he observed Tang Ji's reaction. "Pray tell, who am I?" The jab was so strong that Tang Ji nearly exposed his hidden tail. He forced it back and responded with a grim laugh. "Jinglin." Being called by name made Jinglin straighten his back. Tang Ji squatted down and rasped, "The end is upon me." Jinglin collected his thoughts. No, it shan't be." Tang Ji said, his voice trembling. "My hands are all bloody. Surely it'll flood through my sash." "Is it bleeding?" Jinglin hastily squatted down. "Allow me." Pressing on the back of Jinglin's head, Tang Ji crushed those lips with his own, chased after the evasive tongue, and sucked it hard. Eyes filled with shock, Jinglin tore himself away and fell on his behind. He was first conflicted about whether he should wipe the wetness on his lips. Then his eyes reddened, as he noticed the spit of another man, now in his mouth. He blinked in a daze. He could not understand what had taken place. He tried to speak, only to be thwarted by his numbed tongue. For a moment, all that was left was the sound of breathing. "I acted under the will of the sea." Wiping his thumb across his lips, Tang Ji glared at Jinglin and barked a laugh. "Is what you wish to hear, but I will not give you that, silly Jinglin. This is who I am. What did you picture when I said I was a depraved animal?" Only then did Jinglin understand what Tang Ji had meant. He raised an arm to wipe his lips, but Tang Ji grabbed him by the wrist. "Don't you dare," he hissed, "or I'll kiss you until you cry." Jinglin could have never imagined such a turn of events. He was devoted to cultivation, and never got along with most of his brothers, so he seldom heard of carnal fellowship, let alone witnessing depravity firsthand. Tang Ji's grip on his wrist made it redden, but it did not hurt. He could barely think straight, as it was. "Hey," Tang Ji cooed, his heartstrings being tugged on painfully. Clearly, the lad had been shocked silly. He didn't wipe his lips, just as demanded. "I won't make you cry. 'Twas merely a jest to unsettle you." Jinglin's lips were pursed. He tried to speak, but choked on the gob of saliva he had kept in his mouth. In a panic, he swallowed the thing, which killed Tang Ji's last shred of conscience. "Very well. The matter is set and done. We are now one." "It cannot be." Jinglin was appalled. "Fine. Return it." Tang Ji pulled Jinglin's hand towards himself. "That which you've just taken into yourself. Return it, and I'll declare it void." Afraid of a second offense, Jinglin swiftly covered his mouth with his other hand. His chest heaved. He was too dumbstruck to think of an argument. It took everything simply to stay calm. "It's mine. I won't return it." "Yours? I'm no fool. 'Twas I who left it with you. I never took you to be such a greedy, willful soul, Jinglin. Jinglin was speechless. What a wretched villain this man was. Tang Ji lifted Jinglin's fingers to his lips and breathed on them. He softened his tone again. I'm jesting. I'm not so petty. Tang Ji was not concerned, even though Jinglin had grown fearful. He pinched Jinglin's fingers. I didn't control myself. Is the skin broken? Jinglin shook his head emphatically. Tang Ji put on a mask of worry. Now the aggression had gone from Tang Ji. He was no different from the big brother figure that befriended Jinglin. Pardon me. I'm at fault if it is. May I see? Jinglin shifted the hand he held up as a shield. Evil courses through this town. You. Tang Ji caught that hand and planted a wet kiss on Jinglin's lips. Startled, Jinglin made to lean back, but Tang Ji twisted his hands and pinned them behind himself. At the same time, he used his taller legs to lock the man completely in his embrace. As they say, all is fair in love and war. Though I warned you against trusting my words, you allow yourself to fall for it. Jinglin's face blanched, then flushed red with anger. He hissed through clenched teeth, his lips glistening with moisture. You liar! When have I ever lied? Tang Ji pressed even closer. I kissed you, for I said I would. That is not a lie, is it? How could you? Jinglin's voice trembled. I regarded you as a good friend, a brother figure, but you regard me as a catamite. That Jinglin was shaking made Tang Ji clarify. Bah! I regard you as a catamite? Nonsense. I desire to make you my mate. You aren't a man. This outburst stunned Tang Ji, but the severe expression on Jinglin's face helped him understand. The statement was literal. I'm indeed not a man. I'm an animal, a monster. Has it finally occurred to you? Jinglin hurriedly tried to explain. That was not an insult. A praise, then? Jinglin was utterly defeated, exhausted. Anger brewed and brewed until his fair cheeks flushed scarlet. He had trained long and hard to rid himself of emotions and desires, and Tang Ji had laid waste to his discipline. He was hanging on by threads. I rarely eat humans, Tang Ji continued, but you have corrupted me. If I don't kiss you, I shall starve. Nonsense, more lies. Alas, gut me, and you shall see the truth. Tang Ji pulled Jinglin's hand to his abdomen. Jinglin's fingers trembled as he barked. You suffered from indigestion. Tang Ji burst out laughing. Well, what now? You no longer wish to extend our brotherly bond? Brothers act not so. Well, Tang Ji suddenly reined in his smile. In that case, I shall lay it bare, Jinglin. The solemn mask convinced Jinglin that what would follow was an all-important secret, or perhaps a pitiable reason for this offensive act. To his dismay, Tang Ji said, I wish to see you 1,000 times a day. Then imagine ravishing you 1,000 times more. The only reason I'd act as an older brother is to feel the heat stir in my loins when you call me Guga. At first, Jinglin was dumb. Then a red flush surfaced on his skin from his nape to his ears. Words tumbled about in his mouth as he tried to form them, but in the end, they rolled into a ball of paste that stuck to his tongue. His face burnt. His heart burnt. The flames spread until the world before his eyes blurred. His spiritual expanse, barely recovered from the transcendence process, succumbed to the turbulence. He fell headlong into Tang Ji, his head knocking the latter's chin. Tang Ji's head snapped back, but he caught Jinglin, who was now unconscious. Still thy heart, and purge thyself of desires. Such was the commandment given to Jinglin on a piece of paper when he joined the sect. He had left Nanchan Temple not long ago. He had begun securing his hair with a silver crown, and wearing a white robe so big for his frame that the sleeves hung to the ground. He picked them up and ran after his adoptive brothers, who were chatting and laughing. Pray, a word, please, he shouted to Lirong in particular. A soft southern twang still colored his childish voice, so the elder knew who had spoken before seeing his face. He stopped in his path. Jinglin, was it? Jinglin nodded and nudged his crown. He showed the paper to Li Rong. What is here writ? Li Rong read it and said with a wry smile, Alas, it's gone to you, which comes as no surprise. You are to cultivate to be a swordsman and a vanquisher of evil. Father gives this commandment unto you, which you must commit to memory. But what does that all mean? You must rid yourself of emotions and desire, Li Rong said, for you shall slay demons and humans that others cannot. You shall not harbor selfish notions. As you approach the great accomplishment stage, you must forget about self and thus fear. This path should prove easier for you than anyone else, for your true form is a sword. Jinglin did not understand. Why would it be easier? Li Rong felt a pang of pity and chose silence, but Taoja, who had caught up to them, craned his head for a look and blurted, For you have no heart. He who has a heart would never manifest a true form before an expanse. Heartless boy, heartless boy. They were then summoned for supper, and the others went off. Jinglin folded the paper before opening it again. The scorching sun above wrung beads of sweat out of him. His loose clothes hung on his limbs like chains and shackles. He dabbed at the salty drops that soaked his eyelashes and burnt his eyeballs. Bowing his head, he rubbed his eyes. Then he rubbed them again. A man had a heart. Of course, Jinglin was no exception. He merely had a tad more talent than most, and had the fortune to meet Buddha. When Buddha ordained him, he already knew good from evil. They spoke of purging oneself of emotions and desires, as if it were a simple task, like writing. He would have to forge and temper his heart repeatedly, until it became cold and merciless, without feelings, without passion. But a heart it would be. When Jinglin came to, Tang Ji was observing him with folded arms. They locked eyes for a moment before the former sat up. How long have I slept? 6 hours. Tang Ji sat against the window, outside of which was plunged into darkness that hid even the stars. Jinglin touched his abdomen. His spiritual expanse was far too tranquil, as if someone had placated it. Tang Ji lay next to Jinglin and stretched out his legs. I've made a discovery. A little slow to respond, Jinglin looked towards Tang Ji, who didn't look back. There are no children in Qixing, not a single corpse. As Yining said, the sect recruited children from across the lands several months ago. Perhaps the children of Qixing were long sent away. Some remained in Huaishu, yet all of those in Qixing were sent away. Tang Ji said, Coincidences? I think not. Jinglin sorted out the information. Why would the demons remove only the children's corpses? The cause of death in the children was curious, too. Tang Ji tapped his knee. The mystery grows ever more. I'd fathom that it's related to your sect. Naturally so, Jinglin said. This area is under our jurisdiction. The sheer number of children would be far too many to populate a private academy, so where did the rest go? Jinglin pondered. The membership of the sect has decreased so sharply that we have an urgent need for new recruits. Even if they never show aptitude, they could remain and work as attendants. No, Tang Ji said. I know of the recruitment, but these children are only 4 or 5 years of age, and some even younger. Even if they are spares, I doubt they can perform manual work. A pang shot through Jinglin's skull. He frowned. To find information, I must first return home. I have questions for you. My good Jinglin. Tang Ji caressed the prayer bead and asked bluntly, Have you never known a woman? Memories of what had happened before he fainted made Jinglin wary. I shan't say. Tang Ji burst out laughing. Good heavens! Never have I flirted so mightily well that a man fainted. I fainted, for my expanse is still unstable. 'Twas not because your mind strayed? Tang Ji trapped him on the bed. To think this proper young man was secretly entertaining himself with lewd thoughts of me. You should be more honest with me. Jinglin felt the dizziness threatening to return. Sweat began forming. I did no such thing. You wish not to revel in the throes of ecstasy with me? Tangji gazed deeply into his eyes. Are you sure? I can give you even more than kisses, and not a soul shall know. I am sure. Jinglin covered his ears. Aha! Tangji drawled, pressing ever closer to Jinglin. He blew air between the fingers on his ear. If so, why are your cheeks red? Jinglin shivered from the brush of his breath, and a dreadful numbness ran up his back. He retorted feebly, They're not. Tangji peeled his hand from his face. I shall kiss you now. Jinglin's heart pounded like a rabbit kicking its legs for the first time. He gazed at Tangji. He could shake off his hand, denounce his inappropriate behavior, and scold him. But his mind had turned mushy again, becoming quite unlike him. His breathing stalled, and color drained from his face. The dizzy spell crashed over him, so overwhelmingly that he felt nauseous. Cold sweat broke out all over him. He shoved Tangji aside and leant over the bed, poised to heave. His heart, however, became a prisoner in its own ribcage and could barely beat. His face turned pale white. His arms shook under his own weight. Weeping Spring buzzed loudly and jerked. Jinglin clenched his teeth, but couldn't stop the vomit. Tangji was furious. His concern had been piqued when Jinglin fainted, so he decided to test his conjecture, which proved to be true. He brought the man in his arms. Jinglin had turned green, fingers clutching at his own chest. Find peace and focus your energy, Tangji cooed while transferring energy. Defend your mind and stabilize your spiritual expanse. With Weeping Spring here, the demons shan't offend. Jinglin calmed down and suppressed the nausea. His heart gradually recovered, and he could breathe freely again. Little by little, Tangji dabbed away the sweat. Every part of Jinglin's exposed skin was frighteningly icy to the touch. Jiu Qing. Malice flared in Tangji's eyes. I will end you. That's all for now. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.